Waiting for a second here. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another webcast with the Canadian Association of Social Workers. And we are very happy that you are joining us today, or in the case of those who have heard the first webinar, rejoining us. So my name is Jan Christensen Wood, and I am past president of the Canadian Association of Social Workers. So today I have the honor of welcoming you to part 2 of our series on cognitive behavior therapy. If you're in the territory traditionally known as Ottawa, you, like our association, are situated on unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples, who have been stewards of the land, and we are grateful to be hosting this event on their land. We welcome you to take a moment and reflect on the territory from which you are tuning in and the many nations who have cared for this land since the beginning of time. We are fortunate to be joined again by our speaker, Dr. Nina Josevich. I'm sorry, Nina. The author of CBT. Thank you. The author of CBT Made Simple. She is a psychologist in private practice, a faculty member at the Department of Applied Psychology and Human Development at the University of Toronto. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, and for those of you who've been here before, a little bit of housekeeping. Our webinar is approximately 80 minutes long with a 10-minute Q&A at the end. Please note that all the details you need on how to access your certificate of attendance, get additional resources and other housekeeping information are found at the bottom of your screen under the housekeeping icon. What else do I need to tell you? Oh, that's the one with the hands in the little house. You can resize and move around any of the elements you see on your screen to customize your viewing experience. So take a moment, personalize your screen. During the presentation, we encourage you to type in questions at any time, as we will compile them to ask Dr. Nina at the end. Please also see the handout widget for additional information. Now, exciting news today. Thanks to Dr. Nina's generosity, we are giving away a copy of her book, CBT Made Simple, as well as some of our own CASW Social Work is Essential masks to individuals who ask a question in the Q&A box. So if you are selected to receive the book and the masks, you will be contacted. Because we're expecting a lot of questions, please don't panic if your particular question cannot be answered in the time that we have. You will still be included in the draw. So with that, I am honored to pass on to Dr. Nina. And welcome back again, Dr. Nina. We're very excited to have you with us.
Thank you very much. And Jan, thank you for the lovely introduction. And so nice to be back with everyone. Let me just check. Jan, you see my slides. Is that right? That's all good?
Yes, I do.
We've got the first slide up here.
Yes.
Okay, terrific. So I just wanted to start there, my conflict of interest. I do get royalties from my book. What I also wanted to say is a lot, if not most, of what I'm going to be talking about today is in my book, and you should have a link to a complimentary chapter that New Harbinger has made available to people, as well as a link to one of the many videos that are part of the book. And I chose a link on behavioral activation and a video on behavioral activation, which is what we'll be talking about mainly today. So what's our agenda for today? So first of all, I want to talk briefly just about working with behaviors. The first part of the webinar series, which we had a couple of weeks ago now, was on working with thoughts and incorporating CBT interventions into your work. And today's working with behaviors. I want to focus on behavioral activation And I want to also incorporate throughout our talk and our time today how to make behavioral activation more effective. And I want to focus on consciously using the therapeutic relationship and bringing a self-compassion and resiliency framework into our work on behavioral activation. So I want to just start with brief from the last time we met. First of all, CBT is an information processing form of therapy. We're very concerned with how do people understand the world. And we think of people's experiences as being able to be divided into thinking, what are they feeling, their physical reaction, and how they're behaving. And then what we want to look at is how do these four factors interact. The underlying assumption is if you change one factor, since they're all interrelated, you're going to change the others. CBT is generally a present-oriented, goal-oriented, and active form of treatment. And our initial focus is on the present and looking at factors that maintain problems. We're not interested in childhood experiences. That's a myth that people seem to think if you talk about a client's childhood, you can't be doing CBT. Totally not true. But we start with focusing on the present. And if we're looking at the past, at least initially, it would be very much, what did you learn in the past? And how are you bringing that learning into the present? So my favorite diagram, which really shows how the four factors interact. And then what you have here are the ways in which the different interventions are targeted at the different factors. So, for example, if you're thinking what I really want to focus on are my client's thoughts, you might do thought records, you might label dysfunctional thoughts, are you catastrophizing, are you personalizing. If you wanted to focus on your client's feelings, you might help them label and rate their feelings. You might move into helping them accept their feelings, being mindful of them. Physical reactions, you would probably want to focus on their myriad of relaxation interventions, maybe exercise, maybe sleep hygiene. And if you wanted to start with focusing on your client's behavior, the main interventions are problem solving, behavioral activation, which we're going to talk about today, exposure therapy, and graded task assignments. But we really think of the different interventions as targeting different aspects of the client's experience. And one thing I did want to say, I think you become a committed CBT therapist, at least I certainly did, when you start applying this to your own life. So what I really encourage the people who were on the webinar last time to stop. And if you get upset this coming week, and I encouraged them last time, just really pause and think, okay, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? What's my physical reaction? And what's my behavior? And just see for yourself if starting to divide out, especially your thoughts from your feelings, makes a difference. Okay, behavioral activation. It is one of the most effective treatments for depression that we have. Doesn't mean it's going to be successful every time. Unfortunately, we don't have that in psychology. But it is one of the most effective and one of the base treatments we have. It's mentioned the consensus guidelines which experts in the field get together and decide on which are the evidence-based and effective treatments. And it is listed in the Canadian Network for Mood and Anxiety, both the American Psychological and Psychiatric Association and the NICE guidelines, which are the guidelines out of the UK. The basic treatment guidelines are if someone's in your office with very severe depression, and the more severe the depression, the more you want to start with behavioral activation and problem solving. And the reason that is if you think back to very depressed clients, let's say they're thinking no one likes me. You can marshal evidence forever. It's not going to have any impact. If someone's mood is really, really low, they're very depressive making feelings feel accurate, and you can't budge them. You can start slowly to help them change their behavior. Mild to moderate depression, I would always include behavioral activation as a component of treatment, but you'll probably also include some cognitive interventions, certainly some physical reactions for both severe and mild depression, really helpful to look at sleep hygiene. We're not going to talk about it today, though. If people have questions, happy to talk about it in the Q&A. Okay, so behavioral activation. It was developed to treat depression. However, it's based on very sound behavioral principles. And what we're going to talk about today is really relevant for any area where a client would like to change their behavior. Do they want to start an exercise program, eat more healthy, socialize more, practice whatever, or even tell a parent, friend, something that's very difficult or anxiety producing for them. And really anything people are avoiding, the behavioral principles that we're talking about are very, very relevant. Maybe not all, but a lot of them. So what's the process? So first of all, you want to assess, and that really means monitoring your client's existing activities and helping them rate their moods for the different activities. You then want to specify an activity that will likely boost their mood, and note likely. You make no guarantees in therapy, in any kind of therapy. You can't say, oh, I'm sure this will work. We don't know. We hope it's likely. You want to plan an activity, really important to start with small steps. Look for obstacles to the activity and problem solve. Hopefully your client will then try the activity and you monitor the outcome. Sounds easy, but doing behavioral activation is hard. One of the hardest is about it is you will have experiences. You do behavioral activation, your client loves it, goes really smoothly, and it's great. You're also going to have experiences where either a very depressed client walks in to your office and you start feeling helpless, which I think certainly can easily happen to me when a client is very, very depressed, or they start behavioral activation, doesn't work that well. Find it really helpful to remember the consensus guidelines and that you are offering an effective form of treatment, and it's worthwhile hanging in there and to keep trying. Okay, so biggest obstacles. First is yourself being committed to behavioral activation and keep on trying, even if it doesn't immediately work. Or if you're feeling, how can BA help this very depressed client? The other piece is your client's motivation to engage in an activity. Depressed people are not motivated. It's part of the problem. And what we're going to talk about today is how to use the therapeutic relationship to encourage a client's motivation. We're going to look at gentle coaching, the role of listening skills, and in particular, some of the motivational interviewing interventions. And we're going to look at the importance of a compassionate attitude on your part. So, increasing motivation. The first piece is you need to develop a collaborative case conceptualization, because you and your client need to be on the same page as to what's driving their depression. And how you understand depression will really drive your assessment questions. And there are a couple of underlying theoretical assumptions, and I want to go over the assumptions. And I'm someone who finds images really helpful. And I'm going to show you 3 images. I don't use all 3 with every client, but I usually end up using at least 1 with every depressed client. The first one is what we've talked about, Changing behavior will change thoughts, physical reactions, and mood. The second one is we all need positive experiences in our life to feel good. Sounds really simple, but we tend to forget that. Both as therapists and our depressed clients forget it. And the third one is depression is maintained by withdrawal and avoidance from activities that maintain positive mood, that you can think of depression as a disorder of avoidance. So let me show you the images. First, here's our 4-factor model. And the way I might use this is I might sit with a client and explain that our experiences are made up of 4 factors. And then I would say, so let's see if this applies to you. I know you've been telling me you're feeling really depressed. Any other feelings? Maybe guilty, maybe remorse. Sometimes people say unhappy. And what kinds of thoughts or images are you having? And we would write it down, and we would be sitting, I call it shoulder to shoulder, so we can both be sitting and looking at the image, and we would write these down. And physically, how are you feeling? If clients are hesitant or kind of go, what do you mean? I might say things like, a lot of people are really tired. A lot of people are teary. A lot of people, either are always hungry or not hungry at all. And then I want to know behavior. And what I'm particularly looking for are, have people withdrawn from activities they used to engage in? And often when I say, how has your behavior changed because of the depression, people might say, well, I just do less. And I want to know what kinds of things are you doing less. I also want to know, are you drinking more alcohol? Are you smoking more, doing more marijuana? What kinds of things are you doing to try to boost your mood? And then we'll talk about how with human beings, everything is related. And so what we're going to try and do is to target your behavior, to see if you make some small changes in your behavior, could that maybe boost your mood? And then I give this to them. I find giving people images to take home really helps with homework, and also helps take my therapy or our therapy with them during the week. Okay. Second image I use is that of a flower. And I say, I want to tell you how I understand depression. As I'm sitting here and listening, I have a sense this is what's going on with you. You can think of our lives as a flower. And in order to feel good and happy, we need to have brightly colored flowers. And as human beings, our flower might be made up of fun activities. You told me you used to like to paint. You used to like to play volleyball, exercise. We often have a flower made up of our friends, a family flower, maybe a spiritual flower. Some thoughts were different. What happens when we're depressed is we do less of all of these activities we used to enjoy. And when that happens, it's as if we're plucking flowers, or it's as if we're plucking petals off of our flower. And our goal together is to see if we can start to make your flower a little brighter. And then we could move into, let's see what you're currently doing, and let's see how together we can make your flower brighter for you. If I'm working with young boys, I'll use the image, or not even young, I use the image of a wall. Good happens is the cycle of avoidance. And I personally, I probably show the least, but it is really what drives my own understanding of depression. So let me walk you through it. A trigger will happen. We'll have difficulties at work, school, interpersonal difficulties, maybe a loss, could be a death, it could be a lot of losses during COVID. What that leads to is a depressed mood and the thought it's hopeless to do anything. If my thought was, for example, what's happening at COVID is really awful, but things are going to change. Once I'm vaccinated, it'll get better. I might be sad, and it may be a very hard year, but I'm not going to get depressed. What happens when you think it's hopeless to do anything is it leads to avoiding. I see my friends less, I work less, I exercise less, I do less things that I enjoy, generally engage in life less. What happens is when you avoid, your distress is initially minimized. Feels good to avoid. You kind of curl up at home and pretend, life has gone away. And that leads to the belief that I need to rest. And when my client says I need to rest, especially my depressed clients, I hear I want to avoid. So I need to rest. If I rest or avoid, I'll feel better. Things are too much for me. As you avoid, you have less contact with positive reinforcers, and you never problem solve the initial difficulty. What that leads to is an increase in depression and an increase in how hard it is to start to do anything. And because you initially felt better when you avoided, you think, oh, I need to rest. That will help. Leads to secondary problems. And it becomes harder to engage in the world. You haven't called your friend in 3 months. It's harder to call them, which leads to avoiding. And you get caught in this cycle. Okay, so where do we go with this? You want to encourage, the first piece you want to do is, once you've sort of set an understanding of depression, is to encourage your client to complete what we call a daily activity schedule, which is really the assessment phase. And you want to do this in a way that you're going to instill hope, and you want it to be a collaborative experience. And I usually try to encourage I try to encourage my clients' curiosity. And I also want to set an expectation for an activity-mood relationship. So the kinds of things I say, we've been talking about your depression and how down you've been. I'm wondering how you spend your day and how your mood changes over the day. I think that's going to give us some important information. So if you notice my language, I say I'm wondering, and then I'm setting an expectation that the mood will change. And then I say, I think it's going to give us important information. And that's the piece that says, this is part of treatment. I might also say something like, I hear you're struggling. I think it'd be helpful for us to have a clear idea of what your day's like and if your mood changes during the day. So here, there's an initial empathy. I hear you're struggling. And then again, it would be helpful. I complete the first day in session because I want to make sure my client understands. I also want to start talking about patterns we might see in today, be curious about what we discovered, and see if that's true for the rest of the week and the weekend. So I just want to make sure, for those of you who don't know what a daily activity schedule is, you start, it's a handout. I have one in CBT Made Simple, and you can get 1 million off the internet, where you track hour by hour what your client did and their mood. 10 is the most depressed they've ever been, and 1 is not at all depressed. And so I might start with, I don't know, Jan, will you role play with me for a minute? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear?
Okay, terrific. So Jan, what time did you get up today?
8 o'clock.
So Jan, you got up at 8 o'clock. And when you got up, will you play someone who's depressed, please, Jan? When you got up, when you got up, if 10 is very depressed and 1 is not at all depressed, where would you put yourself?
About an 8.
About
At 8.
an 8, down 8 here. And then you got up at 8. Did you get out of bed right away? Did you stay in bed for a while? What happened?
I stayed in bed for about another 45 minutes.
Okay, so kind of from 8 to roughly 8:45 or 9, you would have been in bed. And was your mood an 8 the whole time? Did it get better? Did it get worse?
I think it was getting a bit better, which probably was why I got up. I was
Okay,
feeling,
so okay. We're having enough trouble with there's enough of a lag that I would want to know, for example, what happened with Jan that she started to feel better. I would then want to know at 9 o'clock when you got up, what did you do? And Jan and I, thank you very much, Jan. Jan and I would then go through her day. No, but if you notice, I'm trying to make this as interactive a process as I can, and using a lot of summary statements. So you're saying you got up at 8. What was your mood? So I hear your mood was an 8. It's not just and so you got up at 8. Okay, and what was your mood? Okay, your mood was 8. Was an 8 out of 10. And then what was your mood at 9? You want it to be what happened, a structure for exploring your client's day. Okay, let's take a look at this. Your client tells you about their day and you fill it in, but then they say, but then they don't want to do it. So I always ask at the end of the day, at the end of filling in the first day, I say, you've done a really good job completing the first day of the daily activity schedule. And I use it as an opportunity to tell my client they've done a good job. And I think that's really important in therapy because no one is telling your depressed client they've done anything good. And if they have been able to complete a daily activity schedule with you in session, it is good. So I say, you've done a good job of completing the daily activity schedule and identifying your mood. I think it'd be really helpful if you could complete this during the week. Some people like to do it every couple of hours, which is the most effective. Some people want to do it sort of 3 times during the week. Do you have a sense of what would be most helpful for you? I try and include my client in talking about how they're going to do it. And then I say, I just want to check how you're feeling about completing the daily activities schedule for this next week. And it's very important to stop and you check, because if your client's thinking, I don't want to do it, you want to know. So I want you to imagine your client says, as many clients do, I'm not sure. Feels like a lot of work to complete this worksheet. So every one of you, I want you to stop and think, what could you say to increase your client's motivation to complete the worksheet? And just take a moment to think, what are some ways you could respond? So let's take a look at this. You can be a coach. It's really important that you complete this. I think it'll give us a lot of important information. What do you think? You think you could try? And sometimes your clients will say, you know what? Yeah, I will try. And my own experience is the better your therapeutic relationship, the more being a coach helps. You could look for evidence. I hear you think it'll be a lot of work, so I'm catching the client's thought. But let's examine the evidence. How hard was it to do in session with me? Hopefully your client says really not very hard. And then you can follow up with saying, I wonder if you're predicting that it'll be harder than it is. Would you be willing to try and let's see what happens? Both interventions, I think, are really good. Sometimes the client verbally complies, but then doesn't do it. Or continues to say, I'm not so sure I can do it. It feels really, really hard. At that point, you want to remember this always, effective therapy is based on a positive therapeutic alliance, empathy, collaboration, and your client feeling heard. And whenever you get, we traditionally think of resistance or your client not wanting to do homework, you want to pull out your really solid listening skills. You want to check your nonverbal warmth. You want to make sure you're doing open questions. You want to reflect feelings and thoughts, and you also want to catch implied feelings. I hear, I'm not sure, but I think I hear you're not sure this feels doable. A lot of summary statements, and you want to model compassion. And there I might say something like, I hear you think it's going to be really hard to do, and you know what? It is hard. I think you're right. I think I am asking you to do something that may take effort on your part and may be hard. But I'm wondering if despite it being hard, it could be something you could do. But you want to make sure you bring compassion for the difficulty in. This can be really important and may be sufficient. The other piece you want to do is listen for change talk. And for those, I'm sure we're a large audience today. I'm sure there are many people in the audience who are very familiar with motivational interviewing. For those of you who aren't, I think it's really important to familiarize yourself. And there are wonderful texts out there. The piece of motivational interviewing is you listen for difficulties and your client's reasons not to engage in the activity or stay the same. And there you're using reflective, non-judgmental statements. I hear it seems really hard to keep track of your moods for a week. And then you want to listen for change talk or desire for change, expressions of strength. You want to then reflect back the ambivalence and reflect back the desire for change. So an interaction might go something like I hear it seems really hard to keep track of your client says it seems exhausting. Really think if I could try. I hear change talk. So I would say, even though it seems exhausting, acknowledging the difficulty, you'd be willing to try if it could help, acknowledging the desire to change. Now, because I'm doing a webinar, this is like 3 sentences. When I do it with real clients, we often stay here for 5-10 minutes where I am reflectively I am reflecting back the difficulty and listening for change talk that I can grab onto. Okay. Let's say it is successful. Your client goes away, does their daily activity schedule, comes back and brings a completed daily activity schedule. And you want to take a look at it in session. So let's look at a client. We've got Risa. She's 28 years old. She just moved back home to take care of an aging mother. Oh, before I do this, let me just backtrack a minute. One of the things I like to do during my webinars is just pause and ask people to just take a moment and think, is there anything that's been covered so far that I would like to bring into my practice? And just jot down a note for yourself. Is it something around the images, incorporating an understanding of avoidance, anything around using reflective listening or MI strategies, and just note it for yourself. Okay, let's go back to Risa, 28 years old, just moved back home to take care of an aging mother, few friends, new job. We took a look at recent changes: loss of friends, loss of exercise, loss of a sense of competence from work. The plus is she's closer to her mother. So if we think of the flowers, a lot of flowers have been plucked off. A lot of her petals have been plucked off. She comes back, and this is her activity schedule. Remember, 10 is very sad, and 1 would be happy. So we see, she wakes up at 9, she's really depressed, lies in bed. Like Jan, she starts feeling a little better, forces herself to get up. Driving to work, she's at 6, works on a project, starts to feel a bit better. Now here, what I did, you'll see I did 12 to 3. If a client says, if they're hunking times, you don't need to write for each single hour what they did. And here I wanted to also have something that fit up on a PowerPoint, but you would be doing it hour by hour. And then home, really depressed every night, surfing the internet, and she goes to bed at 12. So we would I would spend some time with my client looking at this, but what do you do with it? So the first is I want to remember to summarize, and I want to look for patterns. I'm going to be looking for mood activity patterns that I can then use as a leverage to encourage my client to be more active. So I start with general questions. Were you able, I might say, were you able to complete the daily activity schedule? Or if they bring it in, I say, this is great. You were able to complete the activity schedule. What was it like for you? I want to check what the experience was. And then I always ask, did you learn anything? Because what your client brings to the table in terms of what they learned that I can then expand upon is much more impactful. It also means if a client comes in and says something like, I thought I was depressed all day, but I actually feel better when I go to work, that enables me to say, I think that's a really important observation, which enables me to tell my client what you just noticed is important and it's hopeful. Or if they say, I just realized every night I'm home and it's so depressing and terrible, I can also say, I think that's a really important observation because what it does for us is suggest an area that it might be helpful to target. So you want to reinforce what your client learned. To look at some particular questions in detail. The first one is, do you see an activity mood? And I often have these written out so that I can give it to my client and say, let's take a look at them. And I mean, I have them in my head, but you can also have them as a sheet of paper that you refer to. Do you see a mood activity relationship? What activities help you feel better? And when your client says, I think it's when I socialize, I say, I think that's really important. Let's write it down. I want to make sure we don't forget that. What activities or situation are related to a low mood? I'll often make 2 columns. Let's write down what seems to help. Let's write down what doesn't seem to help, because I think we may be onto something really important for you. Are there time periods that are most at risk? Okay, it's important we realize this because it gives us an idea of what to target for you. Any routines that help you maintain a positive mood? And is there anything you're avoiding? When people start to say I'm avoiding, that also leads me to think, Okay, are there some real problems we want to start problem solving over? So let's just do this. Whoops, sorry. Let's do this very quickly. If we look at this, any of you see, just jot down. I usually work on Zoom, so I can see the chat box, and I don't know how to see a chat box on this platform, but I want all of you to just write down, do you see any patterns? Do you see a mood activity relationship? A time when our client is feeling better and a time when our client's feeling worse. Do you see any activities that lead our client to feeling worse? Do you see any times of day to target? Which are the worst times of day for your client? Any routines? Okay. And anything she's avoiding. So when I look at this, I see when she's with people, she feels better. Phoning Joyce, reading with Mother, dinner with Ellen, project with Rita, lunch with Sue. Socializing seems to help. Being at work seems to help. So if this was a client who said to me, will you give me a note so I don't have to go to work? I'd be really, really hesitant to do that. Worst times, being in bed in the morning, I'd want to try and understand what that's about. Whenever she's home surfing the internet, really, really bad. We want to target those times. So as a therapist, I would hope that with my client, we had started to reach an agreement as to what we would want to target. So that and we would have it written out. And so I would say something like, I think you did a really good job of tracking your moods during the week and seeing how they fluctuate with what you do. It makes me wonder if we could together develop a plan for ways that you could increase your mood boosting activities, if that would be one way of helping you feel better. So I'm actively using what my client brought me as the next step, and it's coming from them. Okay, we thought we did this. You then want to plan an activity, and you want to build on what you learned from examining the daily activity schedule. You want to use your listening skills to catch motivation for increased activity. And you're wondering, if you increase your activity, will you feel better? If you can bring a wondering, that includes your client. You really don't want to be the expert telling your client what to do. And, I don't know any of you in the audience, or maybe I do know some of you, but I can't see who's there. I do know that amongst my students at OISE, people have terrible prejudices against CBT. They think we are these awful therapists who are steamrolling our clients into doing things they don't want to do. It's really not the case. As much as possible, you want your client to suggest activities, because activities your client suggests are more likely to be done than activities you suggest. So, how does this happen? I say, when we look at this, what part of the day should we focus on? Morning is usually a big one for people who are depressed. If you would wake up, lie in bed for half an hour, thinking about all the ways you were a failure, it'd be an awful way to start your morning. How could you increase or expand existing activities? So I would go back and I would say, I notice that when you're reading with your mother, that's a time when you're really feeling pretty good. I wonder if there's a way we could expand that. Do you have any thoughts? We could look at eating more with mom. We could look at doing more things with mom. We could look at weeding on your own. We could look at doing gardening on your own. We could look at just being outside. One of the really helpful things is when you think of, or doing it for longer periods of time, when you think of expanding an activity, you're not just thinking of doing more of that activity, but you're trying to think broadly. So dinner with Ellen, is it Ellen? Is it, you talked about this really interesting podcast Ellen had listened to. Was it thinking about an interesting thing? Did Ellen take you to a great restaurant in pre-pandemic times? And was it kind of fun just not to eat macaroni and cheese? So really think broadly. How can you expand an activity? Could you replace an activity that's depressing? You know, surfing the internet looks terrible. What else could you do? Any ideas? What might you like to do? People sometimes have ideas. Before you were depressed, what were some of the things you might do? Well, I'd go out and see friends. Okay, we can't do that. It's the pandemic. Anything about seeing friends you could bring into your present life? Kind of wondering about that. Might not be as good, but I'm wondering if there's something about it. Is there something you can join? You know, people tend to feel better when they're socializing. Even if it's not your favorite activity, can you join them? You can get off the internet, and I have it in CBT Made Simple, lists of activities. It'd be helpful to do them. And then sometimes I will suggest. But we think of suggestion as an all or nothing thing. It isn't. There is Jan, I think it would be really good for you if you got out and walked 20 minutes a day. Really, really suggestion. Then there's Jan, when we look at this, one of the things we've talked about is when you exercise more, you feel better. I'm sort of wondering, do you think it might make sense to exercise a bit more? If you notice, I'm floating an idea. That enables Jan to say, yeah, well, I guess I could. And I can say, yeah, tell me what goes through your mind. And Jan could say, well, I could walk 20 minutes a day. And I could say, it sounds like a really good idea you just had. Floating enables me to go from my suggestion to my client owning the idea. The ideas your client owns are the ideas you're going to do. I mean, I'm sure just in the little role play I did with Jan, I bet when I said, Jan, it'd be really good to walk 20 minutes a day, I bet you didn't want to. Right? We don't like being told what to do in therapy or anywhere. Is this making sense to folks? I wish we were in person, I could see you, and then I could get a sense if this is resonating with you, but I can't. So I'm just going to go on. It's helpful to think of different types of activities. If you read the traditional behavioral activation guidelines, they talk about activities that promote mastery and pleasure or that are fun to do. And I think that's really helpful. And it is the bedrock. So mastery is, things that you feel competent at. And it also includes just taking care of your life, answering your emails, making sure your kitchen isn't a gigantic mess. However, there are also guidelines based on evidence from other therapies that can inspire us. I don't know how many of you know about interpersonal psychotherapy, IPT. IPT really focuses on enhancing social relationships. If I have a client who is forced to be living at home during COVID, let's say, is fighting with their parents, yes, I want to increase their interaction with their partner, their girlfriend or boyfriend who they enjoy. But I also want to address, how can you improve your social relationships with your parents? Activities which are consistent with our values and meaningful definitely boost our mood. Because COVID has been such a time of retrenchment, it's harder to do nice things to people. I encourage clients, especially if they're mildly depressed, if someone's seriously depressed, too much, is there something they can do for someone else? What can be meaningful to you? Continuing to be a good parent, hugely meaningful to people. What can you do? What would be a small step? Exercise. The UK guidelines for depression, especially for mild to moderate depression, include exercise. There's something called social rhythm therapy, and it's very consistent with sleep hygiene. Keeping a regular schedule, we feel better. Going to sleep at the same time, getting up at the same time. And then there are all the positive psychology interventions, gratitude journals, engagement. If you walk through the woods thinking about how much you hate COVID and how your life is a mess and you wish this whole thing was over, you're going to get a lot less out of it than if you walk through the woods noticing the flowers. My own experience is the positive psychology interventions, such as a gratitude journal, I use towards the middle or end of therapy. That initially, when people are depressed, it can be too much, but certainly being mindful and helping people notice when they're engaging in an activity, the pleasurable aspects can be really helpful. Okay, so again, I want to just stop for a moment and have people think, what did they take in so far that would be helpful to them, that they may want to incorporate into their therapy this coming week? Okay. Guidelines for an effective activity plan. The plan, your client is more likely to engage in an activity if it was developed collaboratively. And we've talked about that, the idea of floating ideas and coming from your client. It's specific and concrete. Is there a specific activity they're going to do? Not just exercise. Walk for 20 minutes. On Tuesday, and I'm going to walk outside of my condo, down the block. A concrete activity. Do you have a first step? My first step is making sure I've got my walking shoes. I'm going to call, not just I'm going to try and see some friends. I'm going to call Jan. I'm going to see if she's free. I'll send her a text after dinner tonight suggesting we get together. Really important. Is the plan doable? When you think of walking for 20 minutes, does that feel doable? I don't know, maybe it's too much. My own experience actually is my clients go from wanting to not walk at all to wanting to walk every day for an hour. So I'm usually the one who's scaling things back. Want to make sure a plan is doable. Better off starting small and getting success. Is the plan naturally reinforcing? Does your client want to do this rather than is someone telling them they should do this? And can the plan be part of a regular routine? Good routines are the absolute structure of a good life. So it is more of a mind booster to walk every day for 15 minutes than to plan a holiday in December. You can do both, but you want that walk every 10 to 15 minutes. And so I check, and I often teach my clients, we want to make sure this isn't a doable, effective activity. So how do you maximize your chances that your client will engage in the activity? You want to have a compassionate attitude. I say, I think what I'm asking you to do is hard. Because people will often say, this should be easy. They feel about such small steps. I say COVID is hard for you. I think it's difficult to pull yourself together and try to do this. I think it's hard, and I also think it's important. So I try and be very, and I am honestly compassionate. I want to develop coping thoughts, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. I do what I call imaginal rehearsal, and I find that hugely impactful. And what that means is, let's say that we had decided you were a depressed client, and you were going to go out and walk for 15 minutes a day, right? So I would say, I'd like to walk you through the activity we just decided, just to check it's doable and see what it feels like for you. And if there are any obstacles we haven't thought about, would that be okay with you? Say yes. I then either ask them to close their eyes or stare down on the floor. And I say, let's start with imagining that you're in your home. And let's say you're in your living room. And it's now 4 p.m. on Tuesday, when you decided you wanted to go for your walk. Look around, see your living room. I want you to remember that it's time to go for your walk. Get up, put on your shoes, you walk out your door. I want you to see and feel yourself going down the elevator. And then imagine that you go out of your condo, and we decided you were going to walk around the block. Start walking around the block and allow yourself a moment to enjoy being outside. Then I would say, what was that like for you? Sometimes clients say, yeah, that sounds fine. And I say, any obstacles? No, none. I say, let's do it another 2 times. Sometimes clients says that'll feel really hard. And if I say, what's hard about it? They say, sometimes if they tell me, we'll problem solve the obstacles, or else we may just rehearse it another 2 times and see if it gets easier. I then give them as homework to practice in their head, seeing themselves do it. If it's something personal or social, let's say they were going to text a friend, and they may say, oh, I just feel so anxious. I haven't talked to my friend in 3 months. I really want to text them, but it feels so hard. I don't want to, and I just see it being awful. I don't want to stop those thoughts, because what we try to stop comes back stronger. But I suggest we gently put them aside and also develop a scenario or an image of it going well. We also problem solve any obstacles. Sometimes as I walk people through, they realize they don't have their friend's text anymore. They don't have any walking shoes. This winter, I spent most of the session talking about trying to help a woman go walking. She really wanted to. It had been so important to her. She'd stopped during the pandemic. We decided it was safe. There was a park nearby. She'd given away her winter boots from the season before because they were so old and ratty. And it was snowing outside. It was the middle of the winter. She didn't have any winter boots. That came up during the imaginal rehearsal. So really, I think really important. Okay, I want to talk a bit about coping thoughts. And again, if we run out of time, I don't do them. But if we have time, I will say something like, we've been talking about you exercising 20 minutes a day. I'm wondering, when 4 o'clock rolls around and it's the time when you said you wanted to exercise, what could you say to yourself that would help you get going? People often know. And I may say, I think it could be hard. right? Like I'm asking you to do something that's very different from what you've been doing the last 2 months, or you've decided to do something that's very different from what you've been doing. And I think you may find it hard. What could you say that would be helpful? That's usually all I need to go to. We write it out, and then sometimes I have my clients say it out loud. Sometimes we might do an imaginal rehearsal where they imagine thinking their coping thoughts. If they can't come up with any, I might say, what advice would you give a friend? If they told you they really wanted to start walking but were having trouble doing it, what do you think they might find best? When you're in a more optimistic mood, like before you were depressed, what might you think? I find it then often very helpful to try and really remember, why are you doing this? You know, if would it be helpful to remember that even though you don't feel like it, we've got pretty good evidence that if you do start walking, you may start to feel better, and you would really like that. You know, I might bring in the evidence from their daily activity schedule. What did you tell yourself in the past? And we try to really develop thoughts that will help your client get going. And we write them down. I try and have my client write them down. I then have them repeat them out loud. And I use this as an opportunity to say, I think you've identified some really, really good coping thoughts. Let's try them and let's see what's helpful for you. Okay, so we've done a daily activity schedule. We've picked an activity. We've rehearsed it. We've developed coping thoughts. It's time to talk about the activity as an experiment. Now, one thing I did want to say, what I've presented is the whole behavioral activity protocol. If I know a client well, like one client I was working with today, he spontaneously started talking about how very few friends he's seen in the last month or so compared to what he usually did. I didn't say and that he's been increasingly depressed. I didn't say, let's get a daily activity schedule. I said, it sounds like you're seeing a relationship between how few friends you're seeing and your mood. What do you think of that? He said, I think I should see some friends. I said, I think that's a really good idea. And developed an activity based on the effective activity. Okay, you want an experiment. You want to specify the activity, ask your client to note their mood 1 out of 10, and how much they expect to enjoy. You want your client to do the activity and then note their mood after and how much they enjoyed it. And I often, this is a handout for the Predict Your Mood. It's a Predict Your Mood handout in CBT Made Simple. And sometimes I use the handout, sometimes I just do it with them. So the way I would introduce it is I would say, you know, we've talked about you trying to text your friend and then going out for lunch and seeing if this improved your mood, or we've talked about you walking for 20 minutes and seeing if this is going to improve your mood. I think it's important that we see this as an experiment because we want to really check if we're on the right track. And so one thing that I think would be helpful to do is for you to note what your mood is before you start the activity. And also for us to just generally note how much you expect to enjoy the activity. People who are depressed don't expect to enjoy activities, and they won't enjoy activities as much as they used to. So, for example, and one of the things you want to teach your clients is that even if they don't expect to enjoy an activity, that's not a reason not to do it. For example, I'm not depressed. I hope you aren't also. If a friend called me and said, let's go for a socially distanced walk, I ask myself, do I feel like doing it? How much do I enjoy doing it? I don't like this person that much, or I just don't think I'm going to have a good time, I might say no. If you're depressed and this is an activity you've decided on, you don't engage in that question, right? Because you're expecting not to enjoy is a reflection not of the activity, but it's a reflection of your depression. And one of the things you want your clients to learn is that just because they don't expect to enjoy something isn't a reason not to do it. You also want them to start being more subtle about looking at their moods, because if in the past I would have loved going for a walk with Jan, if I'm depressed, I will sort of like going for a walk with Jan. But let's say I started at a 2, and after our walk, I was at a 4. That's an improvement. However, if I haven't rated it, what I'm going to notice is not that I went from a 2 to a 4, but what I'm going to notice is that I'm not feeling as good as I would have previously. So we would fill this in. So I'm going to walk tomorrow at Tuesday at 3 o'clock for 20 minutes. I expect to enjoy it at a 4. And I would fill this in session. I would then have my client note their mood before the activity, how much they did their mood after it. These two are very similar. They then come back, and if their mood improved, we can say to them, let's look, what did you notice? Did your mood improve? It did. So what do you make of the fact that even though you predicted you wouldn't like it at all, your mood did improve? So we can use the data from here as a launching off for discussing how you can't, when you're depressed, you can't rely on your mood as an indication of what activities to engage in. We can also use it as a launching pad to discuss how it's helpful to note small shifts in mood, especially small shifts where your mood improves, and to ask yourself, not isn't it nice, I'm feeling better, but what activity am I engaging in that's boosting my mood? You then go on to increase your client's moods, and you then work on increasing moods, and you work on increasing activity. Like any therapy, behavioral activation is not straight uphill. My experience is behavioral activation is up, down, flat, up, down a bit, flat, up, maybe down, up, up. It's just the way therapy works. I think it's really important to hang in there, and to try and use all of your therapy skills and of all of your motivation and therapeutic relationship skills to increase your clients' motivation to engage in activity. I also, if an activity was not successful, It enables me to say, let's stop and take a look at what happened, that your mood did not increase. First of all, I check, did they actually do it? Like sometimes clients say they did it, but they didn't really walk for 20 minutes, right? Or when they walked, they were ruminating on how much they hate their life. I want to check what was going on and what they think are the reasons that it didn't lift their mood, and did they have any suggestions? Often it was too much for your client. You taking a problem-solving attitude and not being defeated if their mood did not improve is also modeling to your client the attitude they need to take towards their life. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but my clients often say to me, I hear your voice in my head. And I think that's a sign. I think that's a really good sign when that's happening in therapy. But the voice you want them to hear is a voice of compassionate acknowledging the difficulties of behavioral activation, along with the optimism that if you hang in there with a problem-solving attitude, you will be able to find activities that will make their life better. And that will improve their mood. I think it's helpful as a therapist to also remember the basic message in behavior activation is that your life matters, and creating a good life for yourself matters. And even if your bandwidth of what can be done is quite narrow, there is still a bandwidth. So the activities that we could do before COVID are out to here. The activities we could do because of COVID are here. But there is still some flexibility. And I often think of behavioral activation as a radical acceptance of this is my life. But my life is still important, and it is still important to see what can I do to create a better life. Now, before we open up for questions, I want to try something with you folks, because I think it's very important to try and make what we do for our clients relative to our own lives. So I want all of you to try and think, what is a doable, let me go back, what is a doable, specific and concrete activity you could add to your life in the next day or two? Something you would like to do, and something that could potentially be part of a regular routine. And just think, is it something that you feel good at? Is it doing something maybe you've been avoiding? Something around social engagement, something that's consistent with your values, maybe some exercise, anything around sleep hygiene. Do you want to try and just be more mindful when you engage in your regular walk? Or when you engage in an activity you find enjoyable? See if you can give yourself a small activity that you can add to your life. I then want you to take a compassionate attitude towards yourself. Acknowledge we are in COVID. We've all had a very hard year. It is hard to add something to one's life, even if it's adding something that's enjoyable. I want you to think if you can imaginally rehearse doing it. See yourself taking a walk. See yourself calling your friend. Imagine trying that recipe you've always meant to, but never got around to it. Watch the Netflix movie that you sort of thought would just be fun, maybe play a game with someone, over Zoom, or Zoom with someone you haven't seen in a while. Imagine yourself doing it. And then give yourself some coping thoughts. What do you need to say to yourself to get yourself going? And then see what it would be like to fill this out. Okay, we've got another 15 minutes. I, of course, have no idea what the questions have been coming in, but I did want to leave 15 minutes at the end for questions. So, Jan, I think I turn that over to you
Yes.
for any questions.
Thank you. I've been thinking a lot, and actually people are asking the same questions that were occurring to me. So I'm hoping that I'm on the right track. But it was fascinating and particularly timely. So I'm going to start with the first question from Tierney, who says, "I appreciate you discussing using CBT on ourselves. Do you recommend CBT practitioners seek out their own CBT therapist?"
Generally, I am a huge fan of therapists engaging in therapy. And I am a huge fan of, I think CBT therapy is really effective, really helpful. I use it personally all the time. I mean, even in silly things, I've given a million workshops, and every day, every time, like today, before I'm going to give a workshop, like there's an anxiety, I use CBT skills. They're hugely helpful in terms of increasing resilience. So yes, I think it's very helpful to seek out a CBT therapist.
Mhm.
I also think it's very helpful to take some of the self-help books, to work through a book like if you work through my workbook, it's a combination of both applying to your clients and asking you to apply it to yourself. So in the book, for every chapter, there is a work with your clients and work with yourself. My one caveat is a lot of people call themselves CBT therapists and have taken one workshop. So you want to make sure you're working with someone who's well trained, who you like, who you feel understands you. But yeah, I think it's a really great idea.
Thank you. The next question is from Robin, and she or he asks, how long would you typically target a behavioral activation goal?
So if I understand the question, generally, if you look at the protocols, you're looking at 12 to 16 weeks of therapy. And how long you target any goal really depends on your client's reaction. So I'm thinking, I had one client who I saw a few years ago. He came to me. He had a combination of psychoanalytic and Rogerian and supportive therapy. He'd been hospitalized 3 times in his life for depression, so very severe major depression. We worked on getting out of bed in the morning and developing a better routine, combined with adding he was working at the time when I saw him, combined with adding exercise after work. We probably worked on that for 5 weeks, 6 weeks. He would come back. He had meant to get up in the morning, but it hadn't really happened. We would problem solve what might be something that would be really good. One of the things you do in CBT is you really get into the weeds. We talked about what would he like for breakfast that might make him feel good. He liked music. What would he put on? How would he put it on so it was already loaded on his iPhone? What would he say to himself to help himself get out of bed rather than just lie there? So we really talked about the details of getting up. Eventually, he started to get up and started to eat breakfast and started to do some exercise. But it can take a while. Now, 10 weeks, I wouldn't go, if we were 6 weeks into therapy, I would not want to be working on getting up in the morning and exercising if it was consistently going nowhere. After maybe 2 weeks, I would really want to be checking in. Is this a goal you're committed to? Is this a goal that feels doable for you?
Thank you.
I hope that answers a long answer.
No, I think it does. I mean, it's for any of us who are in the beginning stages or contemplating learning CBT therapy, it does help a lot to hear from someone with your experience. Natasha offers the next question and comment. So with COVID, I am doing counseling sessions virtually. I am wondering how you would recommend completing the 5 factors cycle or any other handouts together so that they are similar to shoulder like we would do with an in-person session.
Okay. Really great question. And I think there are a couple of things you can do. And I would also guess that I think it was Natasha who asked the question. Is that right? Yes. But she's probably younger than me, which means she's probably a lot more tech savvy and may have much better answers that I'm about to give you. But I know I know Jan's laughing because she agrees with me. But if I'm working on Zoom, I have the whiteboard. I have drawn things for clients and emailed it to them. And then we have together talked about it. I think if it's on the phone, it's much, much harder to do visuals. So then sometimes I might say, imagine 4 factors, right? But you need to see, for example, if you're using text or if your client has a text, you can maybe take a photo of an image and text it to them. You need to be extra careful, though, in your use of social media around confidentiality, because texting, for example, does not meet most criteria for confidentiality, but you can text an empty form. Like, that's certainly not confidential. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of, what can you use social media to share a worksheet?
Mm-hmm.
And if you have great ideas, I'd love to hear them.
For those who are registered social workers or working in areas where there is registration, there are often, as you're saying, some ethical guidelines. And
yes,
possibly they might seek out those as well. Now, Heather's question is next. Mm-hmm. Some of which you've touched on, but because she describes herself as a newer social worker, I think it would be helpful to read the question. Will the activities or the handouts or the work with clients be available in your book? Also, the same question for examples of I guess she wants to know, would there be examples of open-ended questions in your book? And as a newer social worker, these are so helpful. Thank you very much. This is from
thank you. So, what a lovely question. Thank you. Yes, what you have in my book, I do a couple of things. One is I give lots of examples of how do you phrase things, because I think that really is the tools of our trade. And I also have a lot of examples of dialogues. And then I also have exercises where I would say something like, let's say you're at the point where you want to develop coping thoughts and your client wants to look up a recipe and cook a new meal. And they're going to, they decided they're going to Google Epicurious and see what's a new chicken recipe. I would then say, and they say to you, you know, I never do. I'm just worried I'm not going to do it. And you want to develop coping thoughts. Would you A, say, I'm sure you can. You've done a lot in your life that's harder. Would you say, B, I agree, that's a really hard thing to do. I'm impressed you want to do it. Or would you say, C, what might you say to yourself in order to get going on looking for cooking? So the answer is the third one. The first two are more either compassionate statements or encouraging coaching. So I do a lot of that in the book where I give you alternatives because I think as clinicians, we're always making decisions. You know, how do we respond in this situation? What do we say? How do we stay on track? So, you know, also for those of you who are interested in my book, take a look at the chapter. It'll give you a good idea, and take a look at the video. One of the things that I found with the video is I actually realized this. I don't know if any of you have seen any of Christine Podesky's videos. They're excellent. She has some online. Because I teach, I've probably seen them 20, 30, 40, 50 times. And the first couple of times I thought, oh, this will be so boring to see it again. I've seen it 3 or 4 times that I actually started incorporating it into my way of doing therapy. So if you look at my videos and you like my style, watch it a couple of times, because it is with repetition that the modeling is taken.
Thank you.
I think we may have time for one, and then I think unfortunately we need to end. But you will find lots of worksheets, lots of exercises, lots of applications to yourself in my book.
And you're absolutely right about timing, Nita. We do need to wrap up. There were many other good questions, and particularly timely around COVID, around working with events that seem to come forward from childhood. So with that, I guess we just have to encourage our listeners to pursue more information. I'm just going to thank everyone for attending, but mostly thanking you for giving us so much of your time to introduce us in very helpful detail about CBT, and to encourage us as social workers to expand both our skills and our practice knowledge. And as you've said, as we're living in pandemic, it is a difficult time not to be able to see people face to face, because, you know, as clinicians, we are used to doing that and we get a lot out of that. But I think you've given us some really good tips on how to work through the changed work environment. And thank you also for encouraging us to look at CBT on ourselves in order to be helpful to others. I just want to thank Dr. Nita again. I want to encourage folks to, if you need details, look into the housekeeping area. Seek out your certificate of attendance. Just a reminder that for anyone who was interrupted in the process or wants to listen again in an hour, you'll be able to see Dr. Nita all the way through, no interruptions. And we are very thankful that you came today. I am going to turn things over to Alexandra Zanis in our office because she has been monitoring the process for yeah, she's still there. I'm just looking at her little picture for the process for allowing us to present Dr. Anita's very generous gift to those who attended. And I'm sorry for everyone who didn't get a chance to ask the question they wanted. I would encourage them to look up Dr. Anita's works and do some ongoing self-education. But now, Alexandra, I'm turning it over to you for the lucky winner. Oh, and a reminder that there will be some folks chosen to receive CASW's special COVID-19 masks.
Yes, so thank you to you both. Jan, such an excellent moderator. Thank you, Nina. What an incredible presentation for our two-part series here on CBT. There will be a little survey at the end of this, so please let us know how you enjoyed it. One thing I will say is that for those of you who did receive a message back from us for the masks, you can either email us your address or chat it back to us, and we will be monitoring those and putting them in the mail. For our lucky book winner, please take a look at your Q&A box and see if you are the one selected. I believe we chose an individual. Let me just double check. Natasha. So Natasha, if you are still on there, please get us your address so that we can send you your book. There will be more ways to win your Social Work is Essential masks, either through our Facebook, our Twitter, or more webinars. So please just check back. They're a limited time offer for National Social Work Month that we're going to continue to give away for the next couple months. So feel free to check back on any of our social medias, follow us, share, and just tune back in so you can have a chance to win one of those. Again, huge thank you to our moderator, Jan, and huge thank you to Dr. Nina. We are so thankful for both of your time here at the CSW, and we will see everyone later.
Thank you again. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Love working with you. Bye-bye, everyone.